MFT Theories. This is Module 7, Experiential Models. Experiential models are an outgrowth of phenomenological techniques, Gestalt therapy, Carl Rogers, client-centered humanistic, and also some inclusion of psychodrama. In group counseling, this would have been the encounter group in the 60s, which had a great many difficulties. It did expand group counseling as a modality, but the absence of true trained leadership caused that to be problematic. Looking at humanistic, the term humanistic, achieving intimacy, insight, judgment, awareness about our own self, moving toward maximizing our self-potential, self-actualization, going up Maslow's hierarchy for altruism, and to understand that to get to that place, all of the other basic needs, survival, safety, love and connectedness, self-esteem, must be met prior to getting to that point. In marriage and family therapy, one theory and modality that fits well into this is emotionally focused couple therapy, which is Sue Johnson and Leslie Greenberg. Their thought and their basis of their counseling theory is that we tend to marry our parents, or we tend to adamantly avoid marrying our parents. And we pick partners that we believe will either mirror good childhood relationships with our parent, it's very similar to object relations, or they will repair bad parenting that we experienced. So when you look to your partner to meet all of our emotional needs, and they are by definition as human beings incapable of meeting those needs, what then happens? Hurt, embarrassment, shame, regret, fear is expressed. All the secondary emotions are expressed primarily, typically as anger. And couples begin to have extreme communication problems, either huge fights or distancing, closed down affairs, and they wind up in counseling. Then within the emotionally focused couples work is to find out what kind of relationship they had with their parents. Where were the hurts? Where are the fears? Where is the pain? Where's the grief? Where's the loss? What were we looking to our partner to do for us? Where did that fall apart? And how can we access the deeper secondary emotions and say, even though I'm enraged with you, what's fueling that rage is the hurt and betrayal that I feel, and have the vulnerability to acknowledge that. It's a 9-step program, 9-stage program with many steps in between. So in order to effectively work with experiential models, there has to be a shared philosophical commitment around how we see people, how we view counseling, how we view change, how we view progress. What do we think about authenticity, immediacy, congruency? If your nonverbals and your verbals don't match, if you're crying and assuring me in session that you're fine, there's incongruence there. How do we arrive so that we can become real and authentic? It's almost like the Velveteen Rabbit approach. It's how do you become real? And practitioners do not necessarily within this model have a certain set of interventions, because almost any intervention works within this model as long as it is significant to the therapist and to the counselor. So Gestalt, Fritz Perls, client-centered, humanistic, Carl Rogers, experiential therapists such as Virginia Satir and Carl Whitaker, Gus Napier, and the Dulles. If you look on page 155, they talk about family sculpting. We talked about this in the psychodynamic chapter, did we not? But it also fits into here, which goes back to the point that almost any intervention will work here. And family sculpting is just a live, kinetically based intervention that says, this is where I see you, this is how I see your position. Bear in mind that Kempler on 155 is there, and Kempler belongs in the Gestalt camp. So despite any of these different interventions, they are looking at coming to synergy, coming back to synthesis. How did I become this way? What does it mean to me? How can I evaluate it? How can I change? Symbolic experiential family therapy, Carl Whitaker, is on the test. I do try to say this. And they list it with this S-EFT, which is so closely related to solution-focused therapy. But remember that E changes it to the experiential model with Carl Whitaker. Looking at page 156. Identifying characteristics, if you have to identify it, is very pragmatic. This book says non-theoretical. My thought would be that it's trans-theoretical. Not that it's without theory, but it cuts across theory. And it's very much focused on the depathologization of the human experience. So you can't diagnose families. Carl Rogers is known for saying, how does that make you feel? Again, if you counsel people over and over and over, and they say, well, my mother died, I'm getting a divorce, my child's in trouble with the law, and the counselor says, well, how does that make you feel? The client is then going to look at the counselor as if they weren't listening or didn't understand. You can only ask someone, how does that make you feel, so many times. How's that working for you, like Dr. Phil? But the reason for that is that it's not what's happening, it's how are you able to process it. With different individuals, you have individuals who go through great trauma that have the ability to externalize the trauma, to internalize their strengths, to compartmentalize it, to get help either themselves, with their church, with their counseling, wherever, that they come through it. You have other clients who are not able to come through it, or even something that doesn't seem to us as a counselor to be as severe. So it's how are they handling it? What strengths do they have? What are their risk factors? What can they bring to the table? What can you bring to the table? An emphasis on emotional experience and to engage your clients and families effectively. It is not behaviorally based. The reason for the how does it make you feel is once you're okay with it on the inside, then it becomes okay. So to self-access, to look for self-fulfillment, family cohesiveness. An important term on page 156 is the use of self by the therapist. And that's drawing on images, fantasies, and personal metaphors from one's own life. It is much different than self-disclosure. Self-disclosure says, oh, I went through a divorce, and my mother died, and let me tell you what happened to me, and let me explain my journey to you. Use of self is being able to project yourself empathically into the client's experience, to be there where they're at and understand, to cross over and come back out and look at it through that lens, through their eyes. Not that you're telling all about your own personal self, but that you are able to make that emotional connection with them to help. Symbolic nonverbal methods or play. Yay, play therapy. And the use of co-therapy using more than one counselor. I've said this in other sessions, other modules, but I do want to say this with Carl Whitaker. And Carl Whitaker, it says even in page 156 in this text, that Whitaker says took an audacious position, never before espoused. And he believed in participant therapy, that to some degree that you are both the patient and the therapist, and that your client is both the patient and the therapist.
It's very gallant.
It is very gallant. And both are very vulnerable, both regress, both grow. They're locked together in this experience called counseling. Whitaker says that we gain as much from our clients as they ever gain from us. And that piece, I believe, I think part of the reason that he had this particular approach is because he worked again with the population that they all worked with in the beginning, which were schizophrenic clients. So, but I do think that as we help others, that we grow personally and professionally. I don't know that I would take it quite as far as the immersion process that Whitaker did. I think Whitaker became schizophrenic with schizophrenic clients. I would think he became bipolar with bipolar clients. And then they both got better together. And that has not been widely accepted after his 15 minutes of fame. But his work, I think his work stands. Even Virginia Satir had some difficulties after she got older, and a lot of her personal and professional respect diminished as she got older. I don't think that takes away from the work that they did initially. Use of co-therapy with schizophrenics. Whitaker saw himself in a very rural area where there were not a lot of counselors. Again, on page 157, it said he pursued a very unorthodox approach, that it wasn't approved, and that can be true for many of them. Freud was unorthodox. Whitaker began to conceptualize schizophrenia as intrapsychic and interpersonal, and he began to treat schizophrenics along with their families. This is during the time when they really believed that there was a schizophrenic mother, the schizophrenic family setting, and they saw it very much more as an environmental, contextual problem than biological genetic. And I think that the trend now is that it really has aspects of both. Whitaker did resign from Emory University. He practiced in Atlanta with Gus Napier, the Atlanta Psychiatric Group, and published a great deal of information. Symbolic experiential family therapists try to understand a family's complex worlds by giving voice to similar underlying impulses and symbols within themselves. That is use of self. They also try to normalize. We use the term normalizing the client's experience. Many people who have been through domestic violence would feel as you do. Many women who have lost a baby would feel as you do. Many couples who are recovering from an affair would feel as you do. Many people who've lost their parent or their child would have complicated, inconsolable grief that would affect other important life areas of functioning. So we normalize that, and that's very much from the experiential model, very much from Whitaker's work. Establishing therapeutic goals. Without goals, we don't have a basis for a treatment plan. Sad. And symbolic experiential family therapy sets the goals of encouraging individuation and integrity, personal integrity of all family members at the same time, while they still remain cohesively and together in a sense of belongingness. What does individuation of goals, individuation of self sound like to you? Who springboard from that? Say it out loud like that confidence. Bowen, Murray Bowen. Yes. They have all plagiarized and stole from each other's work because the field was new. And they built and they changed and they saw new clients and they started, they added to the overlays that they saw. Whitaker said the therapeutic process is a journey of family therapy beginning with a blind date and ending with an empty nest. So you date, there's a coupling, there's family, babies being born, babies turning into children, to adolescents, launching out, and the parents are back where they were when they were a new couple in the house by themselves. Sounds like heaven to me. On page 160, 161, Whitaker gives a family interview of kind of the way that he talked with families and worked with families. He made a lot of destabilizing comments to upset hierarchies and alliances. Who does that sound like? If you disrupt power. Minuchin, structural. He saw family therapy occurring in stages. A pre-treatment or engagement stage, which really starts the day they pick up the phone and call for a session. A middle phase. The increased involvement between the therapist, the connection between the therapist and the family. He saw at one point that it was important that therapists not be absorbed in the family system, and he tried to avoid being pulled into that by any means necessary: confrontation, exaggeration, absurdity. Late phase flexibility, the family's coming in less, and a separation or termination phase. In Gestalt, with Kempler, more so in this text than with Fritz Perls, it's very much experiential and existential together. And psychotherapy in this framework was more seen as an encounter between the client and the therapist so that they could maximize and fulfill and evolve to their inner potential. So with that, Gestalt individual counseling kind of morphed into the encounter group counseling model. One of the most prominent of Gestalt family therapists, because Fritz Perls was individual, is Walter Kempler. He adapted the individual work of Perls to family therapy. And he contends that the family holds the keys for the personal development of all of its members. The therapist encounter is a personally interactive way of working with families to blend some of the procedures of family therapy and Gestalt individual therapy to reach beyond the games people play, the defenses, the facades, the faces, to be authentic. That was one of the most important things. And with Gestalt therapy is noticing. Am I tapping my fingers? Is my jaw popping? Am I sweating? Am I nervous? Am I so conscious of the temperature in the air, the ticking of the clock? What is happening with me? Who am I at any given moment? Dynamic awareness of who I am and what I need moment to moment, and within the context of this encounter. And the capability to see it through. Gestalt therapy talks very much about unfinished business and unpacked baggage, that we bring all of these things from our childhood, for other relationships, unresolved existential issues within ourselves, and within the experiential encounter of therapy, that we as individuals and we as families are able to then realize, unpack these things, and evolve into personal authenticity and self-fulfillment. It facilitates self-exploration, risk-taking, spontaneity. It's a great therapy for clients who are cognitively and affectively capable of entering this kind of therapy. It's in some ways some of the best therapy that you can have, self-exploration from a philosophical view of agencies of change. Doesn't work as well with clients who are not able cognitively or effectively to access these things, not because they want, but because they cannot. And they talk about a lot of times that families are blocked. Blocking comes typically, and resistance comes from what we've been told are our family roles, what are the rules, what are our secrets, what are our agenda, what's okay, what's not okay, where are our boundaries. 167, they give you a transcript of a Gestalt family therapy from similar to what Kempler would have done, and goes through that to let you, give you an idea of what it might look like when you're looking at your requirements for the what are we calling it, Andy?
I'm sorry.
Our requirement for doing our role play, our therapist role play.
That is the live demo.
A live demo for our theory demonstration. So maybe those things will also help with that. Virginia Satir, we have 2 videos that are going up into the classroom about Virginia Satir where you can see what she's doing. Those should be up this week. The human validation process model. Satir was in a unique position. She was a social worker, she was a woman, she was working with predominantly white male psychiatrists, and obviously not a psychiatrist, she was definitely a counselor. She started at the Illinois State Psychiatric Institute, and her picture is on page 170, and in the videos you will see her work with families. She also worked with the family research efforts in Palo Alto, California, She was invited by Don Jackson to help him start the Mental Research Institute, the MRI, which is all over the test. And she became an original within the field, trying to determine what price each family member pays to be part of that family. And does that facilitate growth and development, or does it hamper and block growth and development? If you're looking at the term, the price that everyone pays to be in the family, and you guys may not definitely know this, which is fine, but are you aware of Naj, N-A-G-Y, in his work with family ledgers?
No, no, beyond this class.
Okay, family ledgers, I'm looking to see if we have him in here. He should be. He is, indeed. But he said that we keep ledgers and we keep accounts, we keep record books, and we decide who owes us and what do they owe us, and how do we get paid back for the things that we've given to each other and the things that we are owed. One thing that you'll see with both Satir and with Naj, and this is the example I always go to, but it's very common. There are instances of children who are molested during their childhood who grow up, and that parent is guilty, or there's a sense of damage that must be paid for. A lot of times those individuals have financial recompense. Houses that are bought, down payments that are made, cars that are bought, bills that are paid because of the price that was paid to be part of the family at that time. So Satir viewed any symptom in an individual member as a signal of blockage in growth and not having homeostasis, equilibrium, balance within the family connection. And her presenting symptoms, she always saw that there was an identified client that brought the family in, symbolic client, which is the family itself, and she believed she had to unravel the net of this distorted, ignored, denied, projected, unnourished, untapped parts of each person so they could connect with their ability to cope functionally with health and with joy. She believed, as did Carl Rogers, that all human beings strive toward growth and development, and this is on page 171. She saw three factors influencing human development: an unchangeable genetic endowment. What do we get physically, emotionally, temperamentally, in our personality? Longitudinal references. What have we been taught while we're growing up? And our own person, the constant mind-body interaction. Longitudinal influences was the sum of learning since birth. These are the childhood experiences of a primary survival triad: the father, the mother, the child, as the essential source of self-identity and adult self-worth or self-esteem. The mind-body-feeling triad was metaphorical. Each part of me is going to have a positive or negative value attached to my owner. Do I have body dysmorphic disorder? Do I feel good about myself? Do I feel good about myself physically, mentally, spiritually, as a family member? And she has an intervention which we have here, and it's called the Parts Party. Do you remember this?
Vaguely.
We can, if you'll make a note, we can put this up in the classroom, because we have this intervention. It contends that the self, the core of every person, consists of 8 separate but interacting elements and levels. And this work she did has been expanded with some of the work with multiple intelligence theory. Physical, my body. Intellectual, thoughts, logic, knowledge of facts, left brain activity. Emotional, feelings, intuitions, right brain activity. Senses, sight, touch, sound, yes. Sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell. Yeah. Interactional, the I, thou, the communication between myself and others. Contextual, what happens in my environment, what's going on around me. Nutritional, what's happening in my body to keep me alive. And spiritual, my relationship to myself, to life's meanings, to the life force, whatever it is that I believe about these things. And that within these 8 levels, we can harness the potential we need to nourish ourselves and then find self-actualization, self-potential, insight, judgment, awareness, growth. So, she also looked at communication, and how do we deal with stress? And she has some groups in here. The placator is always trying to please, agrees, very, very submissive. The blamer dominates, finds fault, accuses. The super reasonable person is a rigid, detached, robotic, intellectual control, not emotionally involved. The irrelevant person is a distractor among the group, unable to relate. Only the person who is a congruent communicator is real, genuinely expressive, responsible for straight messages, not double binds or confusing messages. And this is within Satir's model. The human validation process model. So, placators are afraid to risk disapproval. Blamers are going to attack. Super reasonable people are going to maintain boundaries and distance for safety. And Satir herself was a warm, caring person, but she was fearlessly direct and confrontive toward problems. She eventually just developed what is called the seed model, and in that model she began to lose the respect of her peers and ended her career with outside of the group that she had originally been such a
In the seed model, personhood rather than role determines identity, and every person is born with a potential that may be fulfilled. I mean, I can see how that's getting a little just there.
yes, and it wasn't accepted, and she became very bitter, very unhappy. Okay.
Did you happen to see the example for the irrelevant person? Typical verbal expressions, words unrelated to what others are saying. For example, in the midst of a family dispute, what do we have for dinner?
Right, and very distracting. So that table that Anthony's referring to is on page 173 at the top of the page. She did do a lot of family assessment intervention, as you will see in the videos that we have to put up. Page 174, 175 is another role model therapy session from her model that you can look at. One of her family treatments was to compile a family life fact chronology. It's kind of like a timeline of the family, not just of each individual, but the family as a whole. Family reconstruction.
Could the family life fact chronology be adopted in narrative thought? Narrative
It
thought?
can.
How?
Because these theories
Honestly.
and these interventions can cross trans-theoretical lines.
Yeah.
As long as you make sure that they match what you are trying to say. So, she talked about family reconstruction. If you have problems and we have to unblock it and unpack it and attack it, then the family's going to become unbalanced. They're not going to have homeostasis. They're not going to be in equilibrium. So once you deconstruct them to break it apart and figure out what's wrong, she took a technique that blended elements of Gestalt therapy, guided fantasy, hypnosis, psychodrama, role-playing, family sculpting, and to put them back together. You get rid of outgrown family rules, you dislodge misconceptions, you reenact family multi-generational dramas, you have opportunity to reclaim your roots, to be heard, to communicate, to see things from a new light, from others' perceptions, acknowledge others' beliefs and feelings. And the goal of reconstruction is to reveal family members the source of the problem, the old learning, to enable them to develop a more realistic picture of the personhood of their families, of their parents. So if you have a parent who believes in very strict corporal punishment and a child grows up under very strict punitive measures, It is helpful sometimes to say, maybe it wasn't that your parents didn't love you, maybe people can only act out of what they know. And it may not be right, but it is what they know. And you know, you do the best you can until you know better. When you know better, you do better. That's a quote by Maya Angelou. So, helping to understand where this comes from sometimes helps clients find some sense of equilibrium and healing, and pave the way to find your own personhood. Maybe this is how my family did it. Maybe this is all they know. It is not all that I know, and it's not all that I have to do.
What age group is that effective with? Is that launching? Is that the midlife crisis? Into old age?
We're doing it right now with some adolescents. The same mentality. We're doing something very similar to this with some adults. You're doing something very similar to this with the person that you have.
But fewer adults.
No, I think adolescents, adults is where you're kind of at.
Yeah, because an adolescent's not going to be able to grip the personhood of an adult, right?
No?
Until you're adult, you maybe can't grasp what the texture of what an adult person is.
Depending how parentified you've had to be in your family, we have some very old adolescents. Some very adultified adolescents. So I would think 12, 13 and up. She also went into some things that the therapist was a guide and the client was the explorer working through family conflicts for healing, to reconstruct. The Avanta Network is in the last decade of her life. She joined and founded this group, Avante being Italian for moving ahead, going beyond. It was a nonprofit to train others in her therapeutic outlook and procedures. Despite her influence in the field, she was one of the best family therapists and teachers, according to Braverman in 1986. Her way of working with families is not widely followed. It's very much like Milan now. A lot of her interventions have been taken and morphed into other theories and other ways of doing things. But the purest sense of the human validation process model is not widely used at all. So family reconstruction has been morphed into narrative. Some of the other things that she has been morphed back into client-centered, Rogerian, into feminist theory, into different ways. Emotionally focused couples therapy with Greenberg and Johnson. It's a process facilitated experiential approach, and it grew directly out of humanistic therapy with client-centered procedures from Carl Rogers and Gestalt work from Fritz Perls, directing clients to greater awareness by engaging in resolution, enhancing effective processes. So, Greenberg and Johnson saw couples as having negative interaction patterns. Attacking, withdrawing. If you attack me, I'm going to withdraw. Pursuing, distancing. If you're chasing me, I'm going to run away. And in distressed relationships, those patterns become very rigid, laden with affect, curtails closeness and intimacy and trust. So they illustrated their theory through attachment theory with Bowlby, that each of us needs accessibility and responsiveness of attachment figures, parents, to achieve a sense of personal security, experience a sense of trust or relationship and safety. When we have marital distress, that hits us as hard as if our parents were leaving us either for the first time or again. Our primary emotions, our real feelings, typically fear and anger, are hidden by defensive, coercive, secondary, reactive emotions. And, I'm sorry, not fear. Secondary things like fear and betrayal. Primary are anger. Repeated over time, it builds fears of trusting people. I have trust issues. You hear clients say that. So they saw the change process that an individual person perceives themselves differently by bringing into focal awareness experiences that are dominant. I see and accept my vulnerability. The partner witnesses this new affective expression, the I statements, and then perceives the partner in a new way. I see your need for caring and contact trumps the issues we've been having with hostility. The individual's then personal reorganization leads to different behaviors. Instead of attacking you, blaming you, having an argument with you, I'm asking for reassurance from a position of vulnerability. The partner will then say, I will comfort you instead of withdrawing when you're having these needs. That's love. That is kind of the step. And it has these 9 stages, and under each stage are several steps on page 180. You delineate the conflict core issues. What is the problem? Then you identify the negative interaction cycle. When we're having a problem, how do you act? How do the partners act? Accessing the unacknowledged feelings. What are the primary emotions that are being covered up? Reframe it with attachment needs and secondary emotions. Promote identification with these needs that we're covering up. Integrate them back into the relationship. Accept your partner's experiences. Facilitate the needs and wants. Create emotional engagement. Emerge with new solutions and consolidate new positions. Basically learning to communicate in different ways. Questions?
Yeah.
Tackling? Comments?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the structure of this chapter was here's a fortune cookie blurb about what experiential means, and here are some people and some approaches that we kind of feel are grouped into this model.
Those are the theorists that are in that model. Those are the theorists, the founding theorists that were in that model.
What's the theme here? You have a lot more experience with these approaches, these models, the styles, the seed model.
Non-pathologizing,
Yeah.
non-diagnosing. Families are not diagnosable. Understanding the core struggle, the core conflict.
But that's different per approach.
Each approach wants to understand the core conflict. Okay. How do you separate the conflict from the communication and interaction patterns? Because you have to identify it. You have to be, and being able to own it and identify it sometimes is the huge part of the therapy. So how do we come to terms with it? How do we protect each member of the family? The family is only as strong as its weaker member. So each person has to be heard. Each person has to be protected. Each person has to be validated. Each person has to be safe. You disrupt the balance and the equilibrium in order to get these things done, to identify the core struggle, to identify the roles and positions, to identify what is being hidden, what the hidden agenda is. And then you reconstruct the family into a more facilitated, interactive whole. And Rogers and Kempler and Gestalt and Whitaker and Naper and Satir are the
Rogers,
Carl Rogers.
Napier, Whitaker, Kempler, Satir.
Did I leave one out?
I have no idea.
I think that's them all. Yes. Sue Johnson and Greensburg. You're absolutely
What
right.
is the first name on Greenberg?
Leslie? April? Questions, thoughts? All right, guys.
More?
More?
Yes.
Okay.
Phenomenological. I gather that means something different in social sciences than it did in arts and humanities. But when I heard experiential, I thought, okay, its deepest root is in the phenomenology, the lived experience. Which
What does my experience mean to me?
How
What
does
is
it
my
feel?
truth?
What do I know from it? What do I know that I don't? What is subconscious about what I know from my environment?
Not your truth. It's my truth.
Yes.
Even if the entire family or community feels that I'm lying, my truth, as long as I'm not prevaricating and trying to deceive.
What does that mean?
Lying.
Prevaricating.
Prevaricating.
Oh, VAR. Or VER. For
Yeah.
us. VAR.
If I'm not lying for purposes to deceive or to manipulate, that doesn't mean that I'm wrong, right? I don't have the right to say anything or do anything, but I do have the right to feel anyway and to think what I think.
And hence, your perception can't be said to be pathological.
Can't be wrong.
It just is.
It just is. Okay.
Why?
So how do you find each person's truth? How do you find each person's lived experiences and perspectives and perceptions? And then how do those morph into a collective family truth, family story, family perceptions?
Okay.
That's the underlying purpose of the family life chronology.
Thank you.
Any more?
None for me.
Where are you looking?